Outback Stories celebrates the pioneering spirit of Australia. It makes little difference if your family came on the First Fleet or on a leaky boat last week. Our unique national identity was born and bred in the Outback. These are your stories.
The early Outback was harsh, still is, and the typical bushman's wardrobe reflected how best to deal with scorching heat, blistering cold, floodwaters, dust, and days, weeks and months of hard riding, and by necessity, often working and sleeping in the same clothing. Australian bushmen would scoff at the flashy Hollywood Western heroes such as Gene Autry, Roy Rogers and Hopalong Cassidy.
Caught them with their 10-gallon hats, freshly ironed shirts, immaculate trousers, glistening spurs and highly polished boots.
That's not to say that our colonial bushmen were without affectation. At season's end, hopefully with a fat cheque in his pocket, he wore a cabbage tree hat trimmed with velvet, jauntily set on his head, tightly strapped moleskins, and a clean white shirt. Around his neck, a white handkerchief, fastened by a bone ring, on which was carved a bucking horse or a bounding kangaroo. Maybe even his boots had enjoyed their annual polish. Mounted on his equally flash horse, he went on the rantan. For the rest of the year, he dressed for practicality, not fashion.
Just mark him as he jogs along, his stock whip on his knee, his white mole pants and polished boots and jaunty cabbage tree, his horsey pattern crime shirt of colours bright and gay, and the stockmen of Australia, what dressy boys are they?
Drovers, stockmen and boundary riders, we dress for efficiency, comfort and hard riding.
The traditional stockman's job was varied, a jack of all trades. Boundary riding, mustering, branding, washing cattle and sheep for ticks and other parasites, breaking in outlaw horses, tending to strays, protecting newly born calves and lambs with a watchful eye on dingoes, and ensuring everything went according to plan at the station or on the road. The drover, although well deserving of the name stockman or overlander, had an additional set of skills in managing huge mobs of cattle and sheep overland, fattening them up for market and delivering them to the agent or sales yard. Both drover and stockman were expected to be expert horsemen. Today women are just as likely to undertake both jobs. Trainees, jackaroos and gillaroos, might well be considered new chums, but they usually slip into their roles quickly.
The term jackaroo came into use around the 1850s to describe a farm apprentice. The term gillaroo came in during World War II, when women worked on farms alongside the Women's Land Army to keep the farms operating, a valuable service.
Excellent horsemanship meant an understanding of riding equipment, particularly the best saddle and bridle. These were the tools of the trade, and drovers and stockmen took great care of their horses and leather riding equipment. Down through our rural history, bush workers have had a definite look, a quasi-uniform, born of necessity and practicality. In the early days of the colony, shepherds and station workers dressed similarly to English shepherds, but colonial practicality soon saw the clothing adapted to the rugged Australian bush. Between 1860 and 1880, many new chum emigrants came to Australia and worked on rural properties as colonial experience. They even got a mention in Click Go the Shears.
The colonial experience man, he is there of course, with his shiny leggings just off his horse. He gazes all around like a real connoisseur, scented soap and brilliantine, smelling most peculiar. Click go the shears, boys, click, clickety click. Wide is his blow and his hands are moving quick. The ringer looks around and is beaten by a blow, and curses the old snagger with the bare-bellied yo.
Many of these new chums had been on the land in England, Scotland, Wales and Ireland, but nothing prepared them for the Australian experience. Lord help them if they tried to teach the colonials how to do a job.
New chums were usually young Englishmen, ill-equipped for farm work, who arrived quite often dressing like dandies. Some even arrived with top hats and carrying walking canes. Although ridiculed by the old hands, they were usually given an opportunity to become one of us. Any la-di-da talk was soon replaced by local bush vernacular. Airs and graces were not the way of the bush. The new chums also learnt, out of practicality, to adopt the local attire, the bush attire.
Hats are a necessity in the sun-scorched outback. The first popular hats were homemade from cabbage palm leaves. Cabbage tree straw hats were light, wide-brimmed and inexpensive. If there is a fashion of the outback, then hats would be the number one item. They come in all shapes and sizes, from the Cunnamulla cartwheel to the grazier's cattleman. And today, where they are commercially made, they are soon moulded to suit the identity of the wearer. Our sniggering, egalitarian attitude is shown in the saying,
"The larger the hat, the smaller the property."
The working stockman, drover and teamster had to have a stockwhip. Australian Town and Country Journal 1875 stated, "The handles of these instruments are short and thick at the butt, about 24 inches in length, and tapering to a very fine point. On this is a lash, varying in length from 12 to 20 feet. An inexperienced youth, or rather a colonial experience, invariably cuts his face or twists it around his body trying to crack the whip. The old stockman will, however, draw it grandly out, and with a flourish make it crack with a noise like the explosion of a gun, which can be heard for miles." One of the most popular bush songs, "Wrap Me Up With My Stockwhip and Blanket," pointed to the importance of the stockwhip in everyday working life.
Wrap me up with my stock whip and blanket. and bury me deep down below, where the dingoes and crows can't molest me, in the shade where the cooler bars grow.
Many stockmen and drovers were expert leather workers, curing their own green hide leather and cutting and sewing to do repairs or make everything from concertina leggings to pouches for bush necessities such as tobacco, horseshoe nails, etc. One of the Outback's greatest experts with the greenhide whip was a North Queenslander known as Greenhide Jack. A stockwhip, bridle, halter, girth, belt, or any other article made by him was treasured by stockmen. Jack was also a great horseman and a champion wielder of the whip. It was claimed he could take a threepenny bit off a man's tongue with an 18-foot whip without hurting him, and cut a mosquito off a man's eyelash without making him blink. Whether working on the station or droving, the stockman relied on horses. Clothing and riding accessories were purchased from the mail-order catalogues of the big city department stores like Anthony Horden's and Myer, or direct from specialty retailers in key rural commercial centres. Hawkers, many of them Afghanis, also carried a range of outback clothing, including hats, boots and buckles. The R.M. Williams Company, established in Adelaide in 1932, revolutionised the way outback workers purchased clothing, and, in some ways, because of their range, dictated fashion. They published their first mail-order catalogue in 1935, offering everything from saddles to drovers' leather sewing kits.
The drover had to be skilled at all sorts of emergency repairs, and he carried a kit and caboodle that contained things like string, wax, nails, all sorts of things that you'd need if you were going on a long trip in the bush. He also had to carry curry combs and brushes to look after his horses and, of course, to do emergency leather repairs.
Good boots are a necessity for anyone working in the bush, and the old saying, as tough as old boots, has particular meaning for the drover and stockman. The image of Saltbush Bill, Crooked Mick of the Speewah, or Dad and Dave Rudd, would not be complete without their bush boots, even if the laces were made of stringy bark or fencing wire. Pioneering life was unbelievably hard, and boots, along with your wide-brimmed hat, horse and dog, were your best mate, as you kicked and stomped doing battle with the outback. Hours in the stirrups, the bracken, the riverbeds, and in the dark loam soil, followed by the slosh of the chookyard, pig pen and dairy, all demanded strong footwear. Snakes were another reason for sturdy boots, and many the poison fang snapped at a pair of solid boots, to reptilian frustration. Bushmen looked after their boots as best as possible. Old-timers cut out a piece of green hide that would overlap the sole and the heel of the boot by an inch or two, and pierced it all around with a knife, and then laced it across the upper and around the heel with strips of the same hide. Cheap, efficacious, and easy to renew.
A case of look after your boots, and your boots will look after you.
A correspondent to the Bulletin suggested that the best way to keep your feet warm whilst in the saddle was to wear socks outside your boots. Another suggested soaking new boots in corned beef water to waterproof them. Elastic-sided boots were preferred, and many riders chose high-heeled, so-called Cuban heels, as to allow good stirrup control. These boots, completely unknown in Cuba, owed more to Hollywood than Havana. The drovers who worked the long grass wore concertina leggings on their boots. These cowhide leggings, so called because of their corrugated concertina bellowing, were important to prevent bruising and burrs digging into the legs. Without the hard yet flexible leggings, the burrs attached to the socks and itched their way into the boots and skin. Many drovers made leather boots for their dogs. Made of green hide, soaked in water and moulded to the dog's paws, these dog boots protected the working dogs from burning hot stones and grass seeds, spikes and razor-sharp burrs. Drovers often massaged their dogs' paws with mutton fat to keep the pads from cracking. No cattleman ever rode without his gooseneck spurs, which were long in the shank. At night, the drover slept with his boots by his head, so that he could quickly grab them if the herd moved or a curious dingo came too close for comfort.
Even today, you can walk into a city hotel and see young men and women dressed in bush attire, shirts with the double pockets, maybe moleskins, a plaited kangaroo belt, a hat possibly, boots, and they may have never slept under the stars in the bush, but in their own way they're saluting the magnificence of the outback and the traditions that belong to it.